have had good discussions, and maybe that you have wrote down something, because I'm not going to ask you about your opinion now, because I want to do it a little later. Okay? Now we are going into the part 2, and it's about the research that we had for the first years. And from the beginning, we had very many questions about why do you have this research? Is it necessary to have? And we thought that the research was very necessary because we were the first municipality in Sweden. We had no one to ask, but we had, of course, the project in Maine and maybe somewhere else, but not in this big scale. We didn't know anyone. So we had someone to support the development and for support for political decisions. This was a very, very, very important part, because if the politicians don't give you the money for the project is over. So the research combined with my role as head of education to explain and to give them the actual giving them the process and all the time tell them what is happening and why. I had very much connection with the politicians, very much, more than regularly, I think. And it was because I needed to give them all the time the explanations for what was happening, because as you saw in the pictures before, the newspapers were very quick to write about if something was wrong, or some parent maybe told them something, or some teacher, or whatever. So I had to be the one who all the time had the information and the communication, and to have the research in my back to tell, we have seen this is what is going on, and we can compare it to the curriculums, to the everything that we needed. And if you're leading a process that you don't know where it's going, do you know that when we have these visits from the municipalities, we had like these conferences for them, I always said, it is like flying a plane and building it at the same time. That was the feeling that we had, because we tried and we did all the best we knew, but we could not have this 10-year plan and just to work with it. We had to be very good at look at the processes and to decide what are we going to proceed and what are we going to take away. All the time. We had very many dialogues about that. The first part of the research was for 3 years, and it was on 2 schools. And this part of research was in the classroom. They were in the classroom, made observations, they had surveys, they had very many different ways to follow the work. I talked about it a little bit before, but I will say something more about the first years. Our challenges the first years was to find the new methods for learning. It's a bit about what we heard about yesterday, how do we use the technique to make it be a pedagogical success. Not to have the technique and put a book in it or use it as a typewriter. That was not the meaning of it. It was the meaning to make methods for learning that we haven't had before, like the summer model, for example. We had challenges with social media, because when it's new, the students were not throwing rubber guns at each other, they were at Facebook or something else. Lunarstorm, I think it was the first years we had. And that was very frustrated for the teacher. But we said, this is one part of the process, and you have to talk to the students and make them understand and make them take responsibility for the use of the technique. And it's in the same way today. We have these discussions all the time, but it has been okay. There were also changes in roles and relationships. You know, sometimes the students are more competent than the teachers in these things. And some teachers say, okay, it's interesting, I learn a lot. And other teachers say, I think it's very uncomfortable because I don't like the students to know more than I do. So it is also a challenge for some roles to get into this. But we have had very much collaboration. Teachers have learned each other, and we have had very much skill training to help all the teachers to be users of the digital technique. The principals also, their role also changed because they had to be much more supporting for the teachers, because the teachers needed support to how to work with these new methods and how to collaborate, and they couldn't do that by themselves. They needed principal to organize and to help them to get together and learn from each other. And the students, of course, many students that had not been so good students, or how you say in English, all of a sudden they could be the best because they had skills that they could show in another way. So very much happened in the classrooms, and this was what the researchers told us. We had what we call it IT teachers. I don't know, ICT teachers, someone told me it's the more correct name. We had from the start, from 2002, we had 5 ICT teachers in our municipality. And their role was to support and to help teachers with the learning methods and with the digital tools. And one challenge was to what I already said, the competence development needs. They are not equal. It is very different. And from the beginning we had these big meetings with everyone has the same courses, but after a while we recognized that, oh, we cannot do that because we have to do as we do with the students. We have to have individual programs with our teachers, because they need so various things in their competence. And face resistance, of course. For resistance is a part of development. I know it today. And you know it also from your work. Some critical steps for the teacher role that the researchers find out. The attitude is very important, how you think about this. And the second part, the interest for collaborative teaching is very important. Your familiarity with technology and IT, and of course the subject knowledge. Because the subject knowledge is also very important, because we could see that the teachers that had very good subject knowledge, they also were more enthusiastic to try new things, because they know their topic and they know what they were going to do, and they also could leave the textbooks and make other things. So these things were critical for the teachers. The principal's role, critical steps from the research. The actively participation, I think it's the hardest part for many principals today, because they have so much other work to do, meetings and so on. So, but this is a very important part. And the second part, make use of specialist skills. Sometimes I think that leaders think that I have become a leader because I know everything and I can everything. But I don't think it's like that. I think the best leaders are the leaders that can say, I am a leader and I have my knowledge and but I'm learning all the time, so let's learn together. So if you can take help from outside, you can solve very many problems. Engaged in the process, and the last one is very important about what I said about the levels. Discussion with the head of education as a principal. So you don't just discuss with your principal's colleagues, but you discuss with the politicians, with the head, because then we have a good process and we can help each other. My role as a leader for the project, involvement and commitment. My ability as a leader to interpret processes, and the last one is very, very important, the leader's ability to accept others' emotions. Change is very emotional. In school, I think, in Swedish school I say, I don't know in your school, but changes can make big emotional swings. So you have to deal with emotions and you have to try to meet the emotions and listen to what people are afraid of, because often it is that you are afraid of something. So this is nothing you can do in 1 year or in 2, nothing 3. It takes many years, but it has to be built on a ground with the values that everyone shall succeed, and you are willing to help everyone, and everyone is important in the process, because a leader himself or herself cannot do anything if you don't have all the organization with you in the ongoing work. This was a small part of research because it was 2 schools, but we learned a lot and we could point out the ICT teacher's role. It was very important, and the principal's role were very important, because we cannot just point at the teachers and say, now you have to do what you have to do, because the teachers need support. And that was what we learned about the first 3 years. The second part of our research was called Unos Uno, and we were 11 municipalities in Sweden. At this time, more and more municipalities became one-to-one in Sweden. And more and more municipalities had the same journey to do as we had started. So when we started this research project together, it was more a national perspective. And this time we asked questions more like, how do you lead this process? What do you need to do in the municipalities to start these change processes? And what we could see in this part of the research was that the politician's role and the head of education's role was much, much more important than we thought when we started the project. So once again, we could say that you cannot point at the teachers and the classrooms and say, now we must have some development, you have to do something in the schools. The politicians have, like we heard yesterday, to make sure that we have a good infrastructure, because the infrastructure is the main thing for a good technique. And if you don't have a good technique, you cannot use it in the classrooms, because the teachers, which I understand, get nervous when it's not working, you know, by yourself. And the infrastructure is a much more big question that we had thought before. So that has to be a good infrastructure. And we also learned from this research that the cooperation between the head of education in the municipality and the politicians is very, very important. Because if the politicians don't have the right, don't know what's happening in the school, they cannot make the right decisions. So this was something else that we had to think about. And you can say that this research pointed more to the upper level. Because before we looked just at the teacher level, maybe the principal level. Now we look at this level and say, if it's going to be a good success in the schools, you need to take your part of it and you need to do some things. And we have 5 things about that. I don't think I give you reflections now because I see the time is going on. The last part I will talk about is the politician's role or the stakeholders' role in the process of change. And to create the right conditions is one thing, and one thing of that is the infrastructure, of course. And you also have, as a politician in education or in every other role, you have to have an active interest in the ongoing process. Because if you sit as a politician and think that everything is like it has always been, and I come to the meetings and I vote as I always have done, then you cannot drive change. So you have to have the activity in the processes. And you have to talk to your politicians so that you can have stability for a period of more than 2 or 3 years. Because change takes so much time, so you must have the opportunity to work with the change for at least, I said from the beginning, this will take 6 or 7 years, I thought. Now I think it takes, at least 6 or 7. Maybe, 6 or 7 is a good, very much can happen in this time, but I think it needs even more time. And actively obtain information, because very much can happen in a big municipality in the schools. And the politicians hear from the parents, and they hear from that, and hear from that, and then they come to me and say, oh, why don't you tell us? It's very bad in that school, and in that school it's like that. And I said, okay, who told you, and what is it about? And I go back and I say, oh no, it was like this. So this is the tricky part, because in a big municipality there are very many people and everyone is talking about the school, because the school is always very important. And it has to be important. But you have to be the one who tells what is going on and explain why it's going on. This is in Swedish, but I wanted just to show you how the organization in school is in a municipality in Sweden. Because in Sweden we have 290 municipalities, and every municipality has the responsibility for the schools. They have to pay the wages, they have to build schools, they have to do what the curriculum and the national law says about the school. So you have the pedagogues, teachers, you have the principals, headmasters, you have superintendents, you have my role, head of education, and you have the politicians. And this one is like, what do you say in English? Administrative support. So to get this organization to be one part where everyone knows what is happening all the time, it requires a very good communication, and it requires that you use all the technique you can, because you cannot talk to everyone in this big organization. You have to find out ways to communicate with the technique, I think. This one I will show you because this was the financial model for our implementation of the one computer to each student. I had very many questions from the beginning. How did you afford to do this, and where did you get the money from? And our politician said to me, okay, you can go for the project, but we don't pay one more Swedish crown for it. You have to find it in your own organization. So we found out that if we take money from our central part and pay those computers for 75% the first year, and the school pay 25%, then they start. And on the way they have to think, as the principals and teachers, what can we do in a different way in our school so we can save the money? Because when you get the computers, you don't need the maps, you don't need TVs, you don't need very many things. You can stop buying it, and then you can have the money for that. The second year, they have the half paid from the central administration and the half themselves. And in 4 years, every school had to finance the one-to-one project. This was a very successful model because we have it today. We have done it with all the schools, and all the principals have succeeded in finding the financials out of this. So I wanted to show you, you can do it, and you can do it in small steps. This one is about skills training and competence. From the beginning, I think we just talked about things, information. Everyone listen and think, oh, that is good, I understand. And then you go home and do as you always have done. The next level, that I want everyone to think about, is when you have got the information, how do you talk and dialogue with others about what you have learned? Because in that way you can learn new things. And the third step, where I want every principal to be, maybe not every day, but every week, to challenge yourself. To challenge yourself to learn something new, to do something that you haven't done before, because that is the way to create development. So this skills model we have had for the 7 and 8 years, and we always talk about where are we now when we have this training session. My last pictures. This is a big boat, and before I started my own journey, I was the captain of this ship. We have a very good organization on the ship. Everyone knew what to do, and my job was to tell, now we are going to the west, or now we are going to do that. Everyone knew, because everyone had one part, one task to do in this boat. And this was the way to be a good manager, and it is. But today, our organizations look more like this. And you have to manage this organization as a leader. You cannot stand here and say your orders, because maybe 2 boats hear what you say. You have to start to think, how can I communicate with all these? How do I get out the information, and how do I get back the information? How do we create, and how do we know where the competence and experience is? And you have to be a leader in another way. This is the leadership. I have had very many thoughts, but one of my biggest thoughts is, what is the difference between change and digital change? Because I can see now that it is a difference with digital change. One big difference is the communication, because if you don't communicate what you want as a leader for your organization. Someone else will do it. Because the boats in this way, they are individual and they have to make their own decisions in very many things, but you have to say what is equal and what is everyone going to do. And in this one, everyone is a learner when you work with digital change. Everyone has to think of themselves as learners. And everyone has to have support to take a small step outside of your own comfort zone, because change is sometimes very painful, but it is necessary. And the change that we are talking about today is not to, in the old boat, to shift floors and levels or shift tasks you do when you work. The change today is to think and act in another way. Before you can say, as a principal or teacher or leader, no, I cannot do that because it's not in my description of what I'm going to work with. Because you had your task to do. Today, when you have a boat to run, as a principal, as a teacher with your class, you have to make own decisions. So you don't have this path of this small part of what you have to do. You have to think, how can I solve this problem? Because I have the responsibility to make my boat go the same way as the others, even if it's very small. The leader signals receive more attention, and by that I mean that if you're not going to the IT meetings, for example, as a leader, and you say that, oh, IT is very important, then I think they know what you think about the IT meetings and how important is IT if you don't come to the meetings and actively engage yourself. Reactions are of course, a part of it. And it is about influence, collective influence. Everyone has to be a part of this big change, and everyone has to help each other. And the last one, balance of authority. By that I mean that I have to give some of my authority to my principals, and I have to trust that they do what I want them to do. Because if we don't do it together, we cannot manage this change journey. My time is out. What do we do with the notes?
Well, I think if we go on to question time now,
yeah.
Maybe you can see who wrote something down, what people think.
Okay.